be chairing tonight's meeting. This event is streamed live on YouTube, and members of the public and the media are welcome to watch the meeting remotely and listen to discussions taking place. Now I would like to welcome all those in Committee Room 1 at Kensington Town Hall and everyone watching on YouTube. Before we proceed with the meeting, I would ask members of the committee to please make sure your mobiles are either silent or switched off. I think it would be appropriate for us to start with the 72 seconds of silence to remember those who lost their lives in the Grenfell tragedy. Start with apologies for absence. Councillor Saron and Sam Makover have both given their apologies. Any declarations of interest? Does any member have any interest to declare?
Sorry, just on that point. If you've declared an interest on an NHS item before, it may be worth doing so on this one. So if you work for the NHS or anything like that, it may be worth declaring an interest here.
We work for the NHS.
If you work for the NHS, yes.
Yes, I work for the NHS in mental health.
Minutes of the meeting held on the 27th of February 2023. The minutes of the previous meeting have been circulated. Does the committee agree to sign them as a correct record?
Agreed.
And move on to agenda 4, which is an update on the Gordon Hospital. This report provides a written update on the Gordon Hospital inpatient wards consultation. I want to welcome here tonight Anne Sheridan and Gareth Jervis to summarise and provide the report.
Thank you. So I'll introduce myself and my role. I'm the Managing Director for CNW Wealth Mental Health Services. Prior to that, I'm the former Director here in Kensington and Chelsea.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Gareth Jarvis. I'm a consultant psychiatrist, I'm the Medical Director of Jameson Division at CNW. We lead up the adult mental health provision across Kensington, Chelsea, Westminster, Harrow and Brent.
Thank you. So I'll just start and I want to highlight a few key points. So first of all, thank you very much to this committee for inviting us to talk through the Gordon Hospital inpatient ward consultation process. The Trust is currently working with the ICB in North West London and with the affected boroughs, of which Royal Borough, Kensington, Chelsea is one, to deliver a public consultation to determine the future of the wards that are temporarily closed. I just want to start by saying that obviously the Trust provides inpatient services across North West London, but one of our biggest sites is here in the Royal Borough at St Charles. So we have over 100 beds, and there's been a very strong connection between both Westminster and Kensington Chelsea in providing inpatient services, indeed dating back more than 20 years. So we provide acute inpatient beds on that site for both residents, and that has been very successful. I'd also like you to note that prior to COVID, the Trust had one of the highest bed-based inpatient services. In fact, not only here in London, but actually at a national level. And in fact, with the temporary closure of the beds, the Trust is more or less at its baseline of what would be expected. Now, patients and their families have long told us that they want less restrictive mental health interventions, and indeed this feedback has really fed into national policy, and one of those has been around strengthening community support and prevention. So over the last couple of years we've seen greater investment put into community services, really bringing together the primary and secondary mental health services into one integrated pathway. So, you know, for people who want to access service, you get that quick access without having to go through various different stages. And here in Royal Borough, we work very closely with the primary care network. So the community hubs are really aligned around our primary care networks. And if I can say, I very much believe that this work has built on and indeed learned from the work that we've done together in Grenfell. Because I very much feel that that's where this work started, and then at a regional and national level, through the policies this work followed. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that there will never be a need for inpatient beds. There will always be a need for inpatient beds, and we want to ensure that people get beds in a timely way and that they're appropriate, and that people have a very focused admission for as short a time as possible to really support their recovery and get people reconnected back in again with their communities. And I suppose what is really important to note is that over the last number of years we have seen the number of admissions into our mental health beds actually decrease. So in from 1919 to 1920, we saw there were 30 people who got beds, and that now has been reduced to 25, and indeed a month across the borough. And if we were to include both Westminster and Kensington and Chelsea together, we're looking at about 56 admissions a month. I think that's really important. It's really important that those people get the beds. And as I was just mentioning, with the bed base we have, we've got 68 beds within St Charles for that number of patients. Of course, one of our challenges is that we know that in our outer boroughs that actually we are seeing more people needing beds, and that is putting some pressure on the system that we're working to certainly resolve. So what currently is happening with the Gordon wards of 51 beds are temporarily closed. They closed at the height of the pandemic due to sort of infection control issues. And during this time, we as a trust have been working very closely with residents, patients, their families. We've also worked with our counsellors and various partners to keep that engagement going. And I know you'll see in the report that one of the pieces of work we've done is actually commission sort of Health Watch, where we developed a citizens panel to really think about what that future model might look like and how to feed into that pre-consultation process. And so where we are now, so our next steps is that the Trust with the NWLICB are working across Westminster, Kensington, Chelsea and Brent to agree what good looks like in the care pathway, to outline really clear options for the consultation that really reflects the views of the people we're talking to. And the process will then be developing a pre-consultation business case and seeking input and engagement again from local partners to get that right. Then that will provide the consultation document that will go out for more public consultation, and we hope that that will be at the end of the summer, so we're looking at possibly September. So just finish there as well, if you could ask any questions.
Great. Can I invite Danny O'Connell and Sarah Allenbrook to come up with any additional thoughts you want to?
I think maybe the concealed class and questions first.
Initially it was down here as you guys first, but we thank you so much for coming here today and talking and giving us this very, very important report. I just wanted to ask you a few things before going to my colleagues. Firstly, I just want to understand why the consultation has taken so long to get to, given we were lifted out of lockdown a long time ago now, which was the main reason why the beds were closed on a temporary basis. And I think we probably all argue that this doesn't feel very temporary. I just don't think it's very acceptable how long it's taken, and why the beds couldn't be opened temporarily in the meantime.
I'm sure Gareth wanted to be. I mean, obviously, the pandemic did take a little bit of time, and there was this sort of aftermath of that as well. There was also local elections, and so we wanted to take all that into consideration. And so I recognise it's taken some time, but we really did want to try and get it right. And so we feel that by sort of listening to people and hearing what people have said, we're now in a position to take that forward. And in terms of opening the beds temporarily, one of the big issues was really around the quality of the estates, and that just not been really fit for purpose, that we couldn't really use that estates to open the beds. What I hope the paper has shown that, in listening to what people have had to say to us, we have recognised that, there's been a need to sort of flex and think differently around our services. One of the things we have done in November last year was open the Mental Health Crisis Assessment Centre, again based at St Charles, to really support patients coming quicker out of our A&E departments and looking at an alternative to really support people in crisis, and that's been very effective. To date, we've seen over 400 people. Only a very small percentage of those people have needed admission. People have told us that they've really found this a valuable input in really supporting their recovery. So we have thought of other things to do during this time. In addition to that, we've had step down beds in the community that is based in Westminster, and we have a crisis house, and this is something that again patients and the families have talked about, something to really support people during the crisis, and again that's based in Westminster. So whilst we haven't had the acute beds based in Westminster, we have looked at alternatives.
I think the important thing to underline is just how unsuitable environment the Gordon Hospital is. We're looking at 18 bedded wards that have 4 bathrooms to be shared amongst all the people who are in that space. That has significant infection control implications, but it also has sexual safety and dignity issues for the people who are compelled to stay there. Within that environment as well, you have very little access to outdoor space. Now there is a heavily caged in roof card shared between 3 wards, and the actual rotate access up there. So there was very, very limited access to outdoor space, very limited daylight that gets in. Now, whilst we work very hard to keep length of stay in these units as low as possible, there are some people who are very unwell, and depending on periods of time, that can be as long as 6 months to a year for the people. And to hold them in an environment where they don't have access to outdoor space is not keeping with current college standards or latest NHS guidance around it. So there are very significant political concerns we have. In terms of how to retrofit that now to try and get it up to standard, that is a very significant project to get it up to standards. Go out to a consultation on its rights forward.
I mean, I think we would all agree that we want patients to be treated in the best facilities, but how long, if the consultation comes up with the answer that these beds are to be reopened, how long would it then take, or do you know how long it would take for the Gordon to be refurbished so it was to meet those standards? Because then it could be a further year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years for when it is actually going to reopen, which this is going to turn into a 5-10 year project, which is just really okay.
So we're working at pace to try and get a solid answer on that, because we could give some guesstimates at this point, but we're working very hard at the moment with the pre-consultation business case workshops around this to try and. What we're trying to go through is a very deliberative process of saying, here's all the logical possible options, let's try and narrow them down to deliverability, affordability, all those sorts of restrictions that we have, and then working through to say, okay, if that was the options that was chosen, this is what the timeline on that would be. So that will all be in the pre-consultation business case once that's finally worked through.
And I'm just going to say a comment at the end, but I brought this up in the JOS as well, but it seems to be a recurring theme that it gets to the stage where wards are then deemed unsatisfactory to delivering these care. And I just don't know why we're not thinking ahead with years to come, and then these beds are lost because we haven't been looking into the future, and we lose inpatient users as a result of that. So it just doesn't really make much sense to me.
One of the things we are trying to do is looking ahead here, and we start this pre-consultation process around looking at what's the care model we're trying to deliver across. And it's important to emphasise that this is nationally not the way that the mental health code is drifting is that Anne referenced some of the documents before about the community mental health framework, which was about many years in the making, lots of consultation with service users and carers to ask what do you want care to look like in the future. And there was a very clear message that came back, oh, we do not want you to rely as much on restricted intervention in care. Whilst that always has a place for certain, keeping certain situations safe, it shouldn't be the primary focus of the way you set up your services. And that's very much what we're trying to take this opportunity to look at and reflect on and look forward for how do we make care fit for the next 10 years for the residents of both boroughs. Thinking actually, most of the time care is set in train tracks and you get to tinker around at the edges and say, well, we'll take 2 beds off there or close a ward here. This situation blew through, it disrupted things. We had to think very fast and creatively. We looked to the best practice examples we had nationally to innovate into spaces and outline some of those very different ways that we've tried to provide care over the last 2 years. In doing so, we've reduced the length of stay across those wards, and one of the reasons we're not having to rely on so many beds is because the average length of stay is reduced across it, because we're managing to find other ways to care for people in crisis that don't require restricted intervention, and we're also finding other ways to get people out of hospital faster. So that is better care, keeping people in restricted environments with shorter periods of time, and so we don't need as many beds within that model. So that's part of the case we want to put forward, is for us to stop and think together strategically around what is the best thing for our residents going forward.
Thank you. I realise this is sort of work in progress, and I guess the key to the success of this will be what facilities there are in the community and how they will change. Some of us are around long enough to remember care in the community, what was that, 30 years ago, within the botany and all of that, which probably wasn't the best example. So, a bit light on that in the paper. I appreciate you're still in the middle of the consultation. But give me some practical things that will happen in the community, or could happen in the community, that will help to make sure that people in the community are really getting the care they need and they're not left feeling isolated or short of the services they need.
So we've got a few that Anne started to outline before. One of them is a crisis house. So within a crisis house, you have a space that does not have the restrictions for ward to be able to freely come and go from there. You also have a model that tries to look at a trauma-informed approach to mental health care within a crisis house. You don't have one that is primarily led by a doctor and a nursing team.
So you mentioned crisis house. How many will we have? Are there any now?
Yes, we definitely have one in Westminster now. You're very welcome to come and visit. It was something we did during COVID. As Gareth said, we felt that this was a real opportunity to support those people who were medically ready to leave hospital, but there were other aspects of their care, often social orientated. Perhaps they need a little bit more support in getting their housing sorted out, getting their benefits reconnected. And so having this step-down provision allows that ongoing work to support someone to the optimum so that they then can go back into the community. A bit like a reablement type of work, but actually in a bedded provision. And we found that that's been very effective.
So that's our sort of, we've got those two models running alongside. One's the crisis house, which is for avoiding admission in the first place, and the step-down beds, which Anne's just described, as a way of getting people out of wards quicker, because we found that people would often spend a week to 2 weeks waiting for solutions to housing, for example, when actually they could have been back in the closer to their community, but with restrictions and having to decide can they come in or out of the building and start getting back to their lives again. So those are a couple of them. Other ones that we've commissioned a lot of over the last couple of years has been on partnerships with the voluntary sector, partners such as Mind and the Recognition Across, and trying to do partnerships with them to work in more innovative ways to spaces. So the British Red Cross one, for example, has been very effective in the RT&E departments, and people who have no recourse to public funds who turn up in crisis, or finding ways to get them what they need at that point, rather than having to medicalise the distress and take them down a mental health admission.
And if I can just come in about the community mental health teams, I've been around 25 and I was there at the the beginning when community mental health teams were being set up. And in those days, you know, you had probably a consultant and 1 or 2 nurses, and then you might have had a social worker, whatever. So a lot more investments. So these are big teams, like almost like inpatient teams in the community, made up of a range of people from occupational therapists, psychologists. We have people with lived experience who are now part of those teams as well. They work very much in partnership with partners like our local authorities, but our third sector, really reaching into homes and really supporting people, because we know that when people come into hospital, particularly those people who are detained onto the mental health act, many of whom come from Black and ethnic minority communities, people have lost so much by the time they come into hospital in mental health. It's quite different from physical health, and it takes quite a long time to build that up. And I certainly have seen people where it's not been very difficult to get that person back to where they were in the community, and they've lost connections with their family, their job, etc. So being able to work intensely in the community is what we really need to do. It is really how we can do that preventative work. Now, I know there's more we need to do, and I know this, particularly we need to reach out and we need to ensure that people have greater access, and that's a piece of work that we really need to do. But I would certainly say that work that we did in North Kensington around the services for the Grenfell has really taught us a lot, and really listening to that direct feedback from residents about how people want services to be delivered. So, for example, when I was involved locally in those services, we learned a lot around having culturally appropriate services. So, you know, for me, I feel that being able to continue to do this work in the community is the way to go. But we will always need acute beds. I'm not going to say we're never going to need acute beds, but getting that balance right is really important.
And one of the challenges, those people who have in the here and now sort of meltdown, they're in their home, and they can't get to the crisis centre
Yes.
alone in their home, and that's when the real challenge comes, I think.
And I suppose for me, I would hope that we would know those people, and we would be visiting those people, and we'd be able to pick those people up. And for some of those people, they will need to come into hospital. Some of those people will need to be detained on for mental health. Some of those people will need the police to help us to do that. But I would like to see that less rather than more. And I think the work we've done by setting up the crisis service here at St Charles, that mental health crisis assessment centre, has really taught us that actually we can work with people and support people to get things together so they can be discharged quicker. And you know, I think when we set this up in November, we weren't sure, but being able to see that quick turnaround and that support for people back into their communities, as I said, only a small percentage of those people have needed to come into hospital. And I know when I go to that centre, many of those people, if we didn't have it, would need to come into hospital. And you're very welcome to come and visit any of our communities.
I think when I hear the issue about you need to discharge people as soon as you can, my worry is that we just want to get them out of hospitals without actually having the places in the community to support them. That would be my concern, and I guess as the consultation progresses, we'll be able to make us feel more confident in that.
Yes, and we never want to push people out of hospital until they're ready, because that does everybody disservice. It does the person disservice and the services that are around them.
But you sometimes get a feel with these reports that there is a direction of travel that is about, and that is a good thing so long as it's managed well. And once they're out, there are places that's careful. Sorry,
No, that's fine. Thank you. Yeah, just a couple of points, if that's okay, because this is actually hugely concerning to a lot of residents.
Absolutely.
That's what we've been hearing a lot. We've taken 50 beds out of the system at a point of increased demand, and irrespective of what we're saying about wanting to move, care into the community, actually we know that there is an increased demand for these beds. The rates of detention under the Mental Health Act are going up. So, and for that, that it's non-negotiable, you have to have a bed. And what's concerning about the removal of these beds as well is that what's concerning to Kensington and Chelsea residents is that 60 to 70% of Westminster patients are now being diverted to St Charles Hospital. So what is happening in terms of bed occupancy and vacancy rates for St Charles? What's happening with out-of-area placements and the rates of out-of-area placements in particular, which I think the report about St Charles touches on as well. So it would just be interesting to have those figures about what the bed vacancy rates are for St Charles, because we know that they can't go up beyond 85%, otherwise things start to get unsafe. I've got a couple more questions if that's okay, but
I'll start. I'm sure that Anna will want to chip in because Anna lives and breathes the beds every day. So the narrative around the increase in demand, I do understand that, is that post-COVID we did see a wave of increased demand, and that was nationally, and we saw the levels of increase across Westminster and Kensington and Chelsea mirrored that, which we saw actually. We're starting to see that abate to an extent now, and so we had a very tough year there, 21 to 22, and a lot of the feedback you have heard from partners and residents was that was a bumpy time, trying to guide through that COVID fallout. And we did have a surge in out-of-area placements during that time, and that was reflective of other trusts nationally as well and across London during that period. However, we've been doing all that work in the background to improve our lengths of stay, to improve the processes that we have around this. And actually, North West London is now the best of all the areas in London in terms of out-of-area placements. We've eliminated those over the last 4 months and have not had a single person out of the North West London system. In terms of...
Sorry, can you just clarify what that system is?
So for CNWL, any patients within our boroughs, that would be St Charles, the Riverside Centre in Hillingdon, the Parkwalk Centre for Mental Health in Brent, and for Harrow is the Park Hospital.
So
in terms of the
sorry, can you just clarify something?
KNC
So
residents,
Hillingdon and Harrow are not counted as out of area?
No, because they're within the same.
Because they're within, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, they're out of area of Kensington and Chelsea, massively.
so it would be standard for the NHS to classify this to be within an ICS system. That's the standard that is applied nationally, looking at out-of-area placements. If you look at other comparable systems, East London Foundation Trust has one acute hospital for its 5 boroughs.
Sure,
And
sure.
so everyone travels into that one centre of excellence to receive their care. So not every borough has its own hospital.
No, I understand. Yeah, but you know, St Charles does, but at the moment it's having to absorb the extra patients who are needing admission who would have otherwise gone to the Gordon, and actually out of area is.
To speak to your exact question on that, in the year 1920, 70% of KNC residents were treated within St Charles Hospital. In this last year, it's 71% of KNC residents were treated within St Charles Hospital. So we're in exactly the same place we were prior to the Gordon closure in terms of percentages of KNC access. Slightly better, 1%.
1% better. And that's because when the Gordon was open, the trust did have out-of-area replacements, and we had quite long lengths of stay, just as a system.
Okay. And what are the vacancy rates or the bed occupancy rates for St Charles? Do we know those at all?
Yes, well, I mean, we are looking at about 98% across our system.
Right.
But as I said earlier in my presentation, our pressure is in our outer London area of beds. So in Harrow, Brent and Hillingdon, we see a lot of people, particularly in Brent, who've not been known to services coming forward, and we're doing a piece of work in that borough to try and sort of manage that. But again, within KNC in Westminster, we actually, as I said, we have 68 acute beds, and per month we see about 56 people within KNC in Westminster collectively. That's the number of people who are requiring acute beds. So within this system, we would be able to manage if we
I mean,
get the work done.
98% bed occupancy though is an enormous amount of pressure.
It is,
It shouldn't really be above
absolutely.
85, should it?
And that's what we're working towards. We're certainly working towards an 85%, and we very much believe that we will get there. Sorry, Gareth.
And I'd also say that that's not an outlier within the NHS.
No, I understand. No, I completely get that.
And I think there are other people we feel that we could divert out of beds, but you know that's work in progress, and certainly thinking about the work we're doing in the community teams, really want to strengthen that more with our partnerships. Yes, it's work in progress. I think right, 85% would be the right place to be.
And I guess the concern as well is that, you know, what we hear about individual cases anecdotally is that actually residents are struggling to get beds when they need them. Even people who are detained on the act sort of sat around A&Es or police stations even waiting.
I would say that if we went back to the system 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that would also be true. 20 years I've been working in mental health, there's always been difficulty accessing beds. It's a chronically under-resourced area of healthcare provision. We do not see that it has got significantly worse during this period from the pre-autumn to now.
Okay.
But what I would say to you is we are working to try and ensure that everybody gets a bed in a timely manner, and there is more work we need to do to get that system right. But there are often a number of reasons why people wait too long. But what I can tell you is that everybody who wants a bed eventually gets there, but we are working to try and make that more timely.
And thank you. Just in terms of what additional reinvestment is happening in the community, because again, it's what we're hearing, and this is about sort of being contacted directly for caseworkers that actually have difficulties to have access to just to see a psychiatrist at Pall Mall via single point of access, that these services are overwhelmed, and just what additional investment is being provided. I'm thinking specifically about home treatment teams, because obviously if we're going to keep people safe, if they're not in a bed, then home treatment team is an option. And yeah, for CMHTs, and also what the staffing is like, because again, part of the obstacle that a lot of people have spoken to us about, and to Councillor Baxter directly as well, about patients who are trying to access services at Pall Mall, is not having access to, not being able to get an appointment, and appointments being cancelled again and again because there's no psychiatrist so staffing, recruitment and retention, and what that's like, and if you feel that it's able to meet the extra demand that's going to be felt because of the bed closures.
Well, in terms of staffing, I mean, we have psychiatrists in Pall Mall. We don't have any vacancies, and I was thinking as you were asking the question, in the inner boroughs, it's much more attractive to work because of inner rooms and waiting, etc. And also, there are, very well established teams with very good leadership. Now, we do have people who leave, and we do have challenges at times around recruitment, but the majority of our posts are recruited. And in fact, last week I was looking at across Westminster and Kensington and Chelsea, because I'm doing a piece of work with Rachel, and I was just looking at our vacancies, and we've got about 3 occupational therapy vacancies, we've got about 2 nursing vacancies in the community teams in Kensington and Chelsea, we have 1 psychology vacancy, but all of those posts are out to recruit, apart from our occupational therapy, where we are doing lots of different work. At a London level, it's quite difficult to get occupational therapists. We are looking at a scheme around to attract apprenticeships into the area. We've certainly been looking at different types of workforce, so we've been looking at wellbeing workers, etc. So I could say that across both the boroughs of Westminster and Kensington and Chelsea, on our whole, our vacancies are looking really healthy. And apart from Westminster, where we've got 1 consultant psychiatrist that we are getting resolved, I can't think of any senior leadership, and we've got management across those teams as well. And we've also got a new borough director coming into Kensington and Chelsea, Kingsley, who knows the borough very well. So yes, in terms of our staffing, I would say it's pretty good. But there are always challenges, and some specific areas like occupational therapy is an area we're working on.
So the question was also just about in place of those beds, what the extra provisions are in terms of keeping that crisis care in the community.
So we've got, as you mentioned, home treatment team. So we've got a home treatment team both in Kensington and Chelsea, but also in Westminster as well. And that is a team that really works between inpatients and community, trying to support people, trying to work with people prior to coming into hospital, and then trying to support people when they're discharged from hospital. So those 2 teams are still there, they're well established. We've got the community teams that we've just mentioned. So we've got community teams in the south of the borough, and we've got community teams in the north of the borough, Pall Mall. We've also we talked about the extra provision we put in around our step down beds. So that's a service that has got support staff at present. We've also got our crisis house. We've also got the Mental Health Crisis Assessment Centre. That is a new resource that we've set up, and that is very much managed at a ward level. So that is a very highly staffed, skilled resource that we have as well to support people who are in crisis, to try and think differently and really trying to work to get people, when they're fully recovered, back home again or brought into hospital. That Mental Health Crisis Centre isn't just about getting people back home again, it's also about supporting people on a plan to come into hospital where people actually need to come into hospital. It supports that transition into hospital as well.
Just worth flagging out as well that we've had the mental health investment standard over these last few years as well, which has gone into increasing the staffing levels of both our community teams and our home treatment teams as well as liaison teams over that period. So there has been a general background investment as well. There's increased numbers across all of those teams.
Has there been any additional that's been added in the last year or so since the beds were lost, just to kind of as a stopgap, other than the crisis house?
So the crisis house, the step-down beds, the MCAS, additional partnership contracts with the voluntary sector, all of those represent extras over and above what they...
And will they be retained if the beds reopen?
No. The district answer to that is that there's only one public hand and it's twice.
Okay.
I don't know how far. I don't know how far I'm into this conversation. I don't know what's been asked and I don't know.
Ask it.
But I'm going to ask anyway. I mean, I would like to know what's the procedure for your assessment period before the patient gets released back into society, and also about their care plan moving forward.
So, we like to say discharged at least.
Yeah. Okay. Discharge, release. Yeah.
So, the assessment period is as long as it needs to be, and we try to always be driven by individual needs in each case. So, Anne was giving an example of our MCAS as a new approach to this. You might take someone on over there for a matter of hours, and in the space of 3 hours, being able to have a conversation with them, call their family members, and sit down and have a conversation all together. We might find a resolution, then a safe plan for how we can continue to work with them and manage their crisis. In the space of 3 hours, they could be going home at the same time. For other people, they might be in a very distressed state, presented very unwell. They might need the restrictions of the Mental Health Act, they might need to go into a ward, they might need to have a rolling assessment over many days, weeks, in some cases, because building that trust and avenues of communication with the person and finding ways to build meaning around what's they're experiencing, it can be complicated and can take a long while to get to a point where there's a joint understanding of the way forward needs to be, and indeed trying to find a way forward that's safe for everyone, for themselves, for others. And so we do have to be guided individually. I was saying earlier that for some cases that can be very long admissions. We really try to avoid that wherever we can. Adoption for a shorter period of time possible. But for some cases that can run as long as 6 years. So very long admissions. But those are the extremes of the way we work. And we do try, as the paper outlines here, the average length of stay within 32 days. So we do aim to have everything done, dusted, planned and linked in with community support as quickly as possible back home. I worked for many years as a crisis team consultant in the community and worked into people's homes during that work, and so we'd often be supporting people back out of the hospital, and you could see people really starting to make better steps in the recovery once they were back connected into their communities, connected into the people around them who loved them. That was the chance for real recovery, and this slightly artificial environment reward has its time and place for certain safety reasons, but you cannot make the full recovery journey in that context.
And I probably have, I think one of the biggest changes that's happened in inpatient care over the last couple of years has really been ensuring with people to know that they have a focused admission, that we know why somebody's coming in, and we're really clear with them and their family about why they're coming to hospital, what's the reason, you know, what's important to them, what we can do to help that person recover. You know, too often in the past, I think people came into hospital and it just dragged on and it just went on, and you know, it was constantly changing. And sometimes, yes, the focus does have to change, but really be very clear at the beginning of why somebody comes in. So within 72 hours, we're sort of meeting a person and they're really detained, to sort of think about that sort of pre-discharging, thinking well ahead, because often people have got quite a lot of complexities maybe around housing or around family issues, or many people we see will have lots of social challenges, and really getting those early. I was thinking of the estates question, really getting in early to sort of plan and support people is what we're doing. And I was just also thinking around, I work most of my time was in the community, so I work as a community practitioner, and for me I suppose assessment was always ongoing. You're always sort of working with somebody and assessing their situation with them, because people are constantly changing, and then that is reflected in that person's care plan. And I think that's probably really important in all care, is like that an assessment of people's needs.
So, thank you. So, based on the operation of Pall Mall before it got moved to its present location, I mean, what sort of changes are there before and after? Are there any major changes based on the service delivery?
Sorry.
So maybe we'll do a double act on that one. So what we've been trying to transition to is a community mental health hub model. So it's meant to be more closely linked into community, making more connections across our partner organisations with social care, voluntary sector, and making sure that we make utilisation of all the skills that we have within the hubs. Prior to that, we had some rather generic roles. It didn't necessarily allow people to use their skill sets, so social workers might not necessarily always be focused on social work tasks. You might have OTs who weren't always focused on their tasks. They tried to do within the community mental health hub model is to do that initial assessment, to come up with a purposeful plan for whilst you're with the health hub, what you need, and then direct them into getting the specialist inputs that they might require to help build up their care plans around it. That's one of the key changes we've got around that we're working.
And I was just going to add, I mean, obviously more superficially, is that the estates is much nicer. So the Pall Mall estate was obviously something that Trust leased, where we've got this very lovely purpose-built estate. If you haven't been, please visit in North Westminster. Again, I think showing that close relationship between the boroughs, just on the border of North Kensington and Westminster. And it's a much nicer environment, not only for our patients, but also for our staff as well. And it really allows us to work very closely. We've got some third sector organisations very closely aligned to that estate, and much nicer interview rooms and rooms where we can have family meetings and group work, etc. So in terms of the estates, it's much more purpose-built.
So you've got special measures in place in order to measure progress.
Oh gosh, yes.
So we'll be able to see how we'll improve service over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, and that's with all services, and there are very clear outcomes with every service attached and what difference they're making, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Just wanted to ask you if the Trust is monitoring consistently across all pathways any increase in delays to patients staying admitted to inpatient mental health beds before and after the warden closed, and if so, what does that monitoring show, and if the data be shared with us? And then I just wanted to draw your attention to some language that I found a bit concerning in the report, which says when people from Kensington Chelsea do need to access inpatient bed, this is currently offered a majority of the time in St Charles Centre for Health and Wellbeing. I just want to understand what does that mean? What's the minority of the time, and is that often, because that's a bit concerning.
Shall I pick up that last question? So I think, as we were saying earlier, the majority of residents from Kensington and Chelsea will get admitted to St Charles, but there will be times, because we work as a system across the other boroughs that we talked about, Brent, Harrow and Hillingdon, that obviously when a bed comes up, we don't want, just the same, we don't want to delay people waiting in A&E. So there will be times when residents will be admitted to some of those other boroughs, but we try to keep that at a minimum. And I think just reflecting on what the data said, so before, when the warden was opened, we were looking at around 70% of all residents got admitted to St Charles and Chelsea, and now it's gone up slightly at 71%.
I mean, part of this is the challenge of trying to plan healthcare systems, is that demand doesn't come in a smooth manner. So you might have 2 people from K&C turn up in A&E one day needing beds, and the next day you might get 12. And so in order to make sure they get timely access to a bed, which is the most important factor in safe patient care, they go to wherever we've got a bed available. So that might sometimes be, actually, we've used up all 6 beds we had available in St Charles today. The next ones are going to have to go to Park Royal and Harrow whilst we try and work through. We always try and work to repatriate those people back into St Charles as quickly as we can. But with this, the reality of trying to figure out that jigsaw puzzle for that day as the demands swing back and forth with the different boroughs, of making sure we timely, safe access to an inpatient bed is the most important factor first, and then trying to get them close back to a hospital near their community. We try and figure that in as quick as we can.
And do you have that data in terms of pre and post closure report that you can share with us?
Yeah, so actually, pre the Gordon, in terms of people waiting in A&E, it was, and so this now takes from the minute somebody comes into A&E, and I think it's also important to acknowledge that 2/3 of people who come into A&E who are deemed to have mental health have come because of their physical health need. I think that's really important that we just recognise that, and so sometimes it will take quite a bit of time for the person to be optimised. So in 2019 to 2020, people waited 6 hours 40 minutes for a bed. So from that was the point they've come in right through until we moved into a bed. And now 22-23, it's 6 hours 54 minutes.
And then just quickly, sorry, I'm going to continue. I think there are reports across the country that community mental health teams providing at-home mental health care find themselves burdened with increasing caseloads. Can you reassure us that whilst these beds at Gordon Hospital remain closed, we're not neglecting the patients or cases that might be waiting longer for support as our staff are overwhelmed?
I mean, we work obviously very closely with our staff teams to understand what's happening on the ground, and we have daily touch points. Every community team has a daily touch point. So none of our community teams are working with large caseloads. We always try to ensure that obviously if somebody's sick or whatever, we have a duty system there so people are picked up very quickly. But as I said, we have that touch point on a daily basis within our community team to check, and we actually do it's like a traffic light system, so really recognising, so people who would be identified in the green zone are those people who are doing really well and moving towards being transitioned back into GP, and then you've got people in the amber zone which need a little bit of support, and then you've got people in the red zone, and those are the people who we would, we're identifying going into crisis, and we work very hard within that group of people to think what we can do differently to avoid that crisis. Sometimes we're not able to avoid that crisis. So certainly from my time working within community mental health teams, we've become a lot more sophisticated and working really closely and really understanding how we manage caseloads and supporting staff, but also recognising where patients are in their journey when people are actually becoming unwell and what we need to do. And again, I'm very welcome to come and show you that and how that works in one of our community mental health teams.
Yeah. So can I just clarify that? So from the point of being medically cleared and ready to be admitted to the point in A&E to the point that they're admitted, it's 6 hours?
That's the average.
The average.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And what about...
And that includes that medical period of time it takes, and sometimes it takes longer. Some people, end up having to be admitted to a medical ward, or
No, I'm saying just from medical clearance, just if they're ready for a psychiatric bed, it's 6 hours on average. That's incredible. And what about the length of wait for patients who are not in A&E, coming in from the CMHTs or coming in from via police or who aren't detained? So what's the average length for people who are not accessing the beds via A&E, so from the GP or the home treatment team? So they're in the community and the team have identified this person needs a bed. Do we know what their wait time would be? Because I know in A&E there's a lot of pressure to move people on.
Well, in terms of obviously people being brought in by the police, people we brought into our health-based place of safety. So where actually people don't have a physical health need, they will come into that port of call and they will be assessed there. And some people actually are taken off their section and go home, and other people will access a bed. And then in terms of community, community teams will be working with inpatient services if they need beds. I monitor the beds 2-3 times a day. Any community patient that needs a bed is on that list. We look at that very closely, so we give the same priority to our community patients as we do to patients with the need, because obviously it's really determined on the risk that a person presents, and that's what we go by.
Yeah, sometimes you get a lot of pressure from A&E. So what's the length of the waiting time for those individuals who are not coming via A&E?
well, anyone who wants a bed in the community will come in that day.
Okay,
Yes.
so nobody waits for more than,
Well, there'll be some people where we'll be doing diversion plans with, there'll be some people who'll be referred to our home treatment team, there'll be some people who actually come into our mental health crisis assessment centre. So there's a number of different options of where we will be supporting people.
sure,
So we'll never leave somebody isolated in the community on their own.
sure.
And there are times people who are on 2 medical recommendations working in the community and will be thinking, you know, does this person need to come into a bed now? Or actually, is this something, can we do something further with people in the community?
So within the timeframe of anyone being identified as needing a bed in the community to being admitted is never more than a day.
Never, when I can get the data for you, but the data I've been looking at.
And how many
Now,
people
that's on average.
and on an average day, how many people are on that list waiting to come in?
That will really vary. Some days there'll be 2 or 3 people. Most likely what will happen is that, and you know, the most likely thing that happens in the community is that the ANS service will contact the inpatient service to say that somebody's going to be detained onto the Mental Health Act, and that person will come directly into a HVAC space or into a bed. Those high-risk patients will come in through the Mental Health Act.
But where there's a real difficulty around this, there is a grey zone around when something's meeting the threshold for admission or not, does need multidisciplinary thinking. So whilst you might have some individual practitioners who are thinking the risk is this and needs this admission, there can be more experience. There can be differing opinions on that, and bringing to bear different experiences and different ways of working to try and look for least restrictive options when working with someone. So there can be varied experiences from different practitioners. There's well, I recommended that this person gets bed and yet they didn't get one for 3 days. But what we might not have seen during that time is all the active work that was happening with the home treatment teams trying to work with the person to see can we avoid a potentially traumatising restrictive admission by working to resolve the crisis in their own home environment.
Absolutely, no, absolutely. I'm thinking more about those individuals where a consensus decision has been made, everyone's in agreement that they need a bed, but you're saying that that never goes on for more than a
Well,
day.
in Kensington, Chelsea and Westminster, because I see the list every morning, it will be through the AMP service who will contact our central bed flow and say, so I can see tomorrow there are 4 people being considered to be detained under the Mental Health Act, and we're getting that sort of pre-notice that actually these beds are needed. And then we will be working to either holding spaces in our health place of safety, or looking at beds, or looking at an MCAS as a possible model, because it may be that we can do some diversion. So as Darren says, we will be looking at different options, but that list comes out every evening for the next day, and those people who are being detained under the Mental Health Act, there is plans put in place for them. And certainly in these 2 boroughs, that's my experience.
Just conscious we want to hear from Sarah and Danny, but I just in terms of the pre-consultation period, which I think has been going on in March through to May, is that right? Just whether you've had any feedback from these sessions as to the direction or views that both Westminster and Kensington Chelsea have. Be helpful for us to hear on.
So I guess at the moment we are doing a number of workshops, and it's really brilliant that Sarah and other colleagues have been able to attend, and obviously that will support the option. So I think we're at the moment we've done the second workshop, we have further workshop to do, and certainly that feedback will be put into the options then be consulted on. And that's absolutely correct. What we need to do is hear from everyone to ensure that those options definitely reflect consultation document, because you know, as people said, this is wider than CWL, and this is about residents and what's right for the residents of Kensington, Chelsea and Westminster.
And we brought in the ICS has brought in an independent organisation, Verve, who are facilitating that process to make sure those different voices and opinions are captured during writing up the pre-consultation business case.
And there's, in the consultation itself, it's still going to be a strong case for the inpatient staying arrangements, only because when I read this, sometimes it feels like the direction of what you guys are doing
There's very
is
clear.
moving away from it.
There's a very clear steer from the ICS and from NHS England that any consultation must have a bedded option
Yes.
as part of that consultation.
But also with the bedded option comes the refurbishment. And
Yeah,
just feels like they, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are some sort of realities that sort of come in around that, but those will be explored.
And within-
and in different levels as
And
well.
will there be trade-offs?
Is there some kind of halfway house, smaller option that can be considered as viable? That is also, rather than the full wholesale refurbishment, for example, that's part of these pre-consultation workshops as we're trying to work through and get everyone's opinions and trying to figure out is there a way forward there.
And you'll be sort of presenting a business case for the refurbishment within patient 2.
Yes.
Okay, so that will be good.
Because that's certainly something that will be fed back through those workshops.
Yeah, so I guess I could give a brief about Health Watch before everyone first about what we are in terms of the service. We have a statutory requirement to go into health and social care services with our volunteers, with our experts, and speak to staff and patients alike about their experiences. In my eyes, and looking at the report, it's around prevention for me, from a Health Watch perspective. I would like to be coming in with the different reports we've already done at the Park Royal in St Charles and saying these are our previous findings, because they're very much at the first kind of stages, so it doesn't feel right to kind of judge how it's going straight away, but definitely part of the conversation around our entry review scheme, which is when we go into these different areas, where we the hospital. We've just done another ambulance report on waiting times, which would be beneficial, I think, for the committee as well. But we just want to be part of the conversation. I have a dual role as well, also within a service manager perspective of Health Watch. I work under the Advocacy Project, and we have a ton of forums with people who have accessed particular services that have been spoken about today, who might not have that experience of the strategic structure you're talking about. And I think it is valid. They are experts by experience. They've probably accessed the wards. They know them very well. And it's about bringing them into the conversation is what I'd be really keen to see. And that would be my main recommendation. So in terms of going forward the conversation, if we have a Health Watch kind of co-production where we have that grassroots network, that would be fantastic. And then possibly another follow-up in terms of a committee meeting to see where we are in 6 months. The only concern I do have is just about timeframes. It's difficult to know when anything's going to be open now, but in terms of what we look at, I found that difficult. I don't know if I could go back to advisory board and say they said 3 to 5 years. I don't think that would be received particularly well. And they'll say purely because of the COVID and it wasn't fit for purpose. But I just was a bit concerned about that. But that was as we are so early on, we can't really judge us yet.
I was going to say that I think it's important that we don't preempt the pre-consultation case, that we'll try and work through as fast as we can now what are all the different viable options that we can present forward. So I don't think we're going to take 5 years.
It's not, yeah. But yes, very much just all about prevention. What's what we've just recently done a St Charles report, and the staff were very accommodating with their feedback, and it was a fantastic experience. I'd like not to get to that point with Gordon's Hospital. There is some learning to be there, and it'd be lovely to have that experts by experience. We've done it, we've seen what it's like, this is our experience. Can we add that into the mix and give real ownership within community and empowerment in community too? So that was my only kind of recommendation.
And certainly when the temporarily closed week, we set that piece of work up with yourselves and that voice exchange, which was really, really beneficial. And that was across both boroughs, both inpatient and community, really getting people's feedback and also getting patients and relatives' feedback as well.
Yes, there is a perspective. We do have a link with that as well we could bring in. So definitely all the resources are there.
And I think it was really useful because that was some of that initial engagement around sort of going out into different community forums and having those conversations. It's certainly something that not only worked well for our patients but also for our staff in that engagement process as well.
I think you make a really important point, Danny, around prevention. That, you look at the structural inequalities that are within our mental health care system across the UK, that black and ethnic minorities are far overrepresented in restrictive intervention of what we do. And we can't keep doing more of the same, expecting different results. And as I say, there are opportunities within this situation for us to stop and say, are there different ways that we can deliver care? So we're actively reaching out into communities to try and get upstream, do prevention work so that some of them end up in crisis and needing the restrictive end. I think we do have to take this moment to try and pivot with what we're doing.
so many things I could ask. Lucy?
Yeah, I'm good. We're coming to some.
So I think we just need to be very clear what we're asking, because we're all talking about the consultation on the new model of care. But that doesn't address the situation we are in now. We have got people waiting days for beds, not 6 hours. We've heard that people are going to MCAS and are on recliner beds for 2 weeks. This is not acceptable. This is not what we should be, this is not the service that we should be providing. We really need the beds, or some beds, reopened at the Gordon now. We cannot wait any longer. I bring it up at the workshops. Nobody mentions Grenfell. We are going to have increased need. We already have COVID, cost of living, but Grenfell, in June, it will be 72 months since 72 people lost their lives. The impact of that is going to be huge. Nobody acknowledges it. Oh, we will. They don't. We've got the ongoing inquiry. We've got the future of the tower. It's going to be huge in RBKC, and it does affect people in Hammersmith, and it does affect people in Westminster. We need more beds. And I'm at the point where I just don't know what to say anymore, because it's what we need. It's the need that needs to be addressed now. Those beds should never have been closed. They should have been kept open, and then you consult. You don't close the beds and then consult, because you've already got rid of it. So I would just ask you to reconsider. Please open some more beds at Gordon, because we need those beds now.
Thank you for those points, Councillor. I think you made some really important points around Grenfell. We have very much heard those. We've kept really close observation around the Grenfell cohort during this period of time. Over the last 5 years, we've had 15 admissions from that cohort, so it represents less than 1% of the admissions from Chelsea. Whilst there might be potential for destabilisation as events unfold next year, actually the Grenfell service is a bit of a beacon for us about why preventative, proactive community work works. It's actually working out to those communities, putting resources in there to go out up front, doesn't result in admissions, it avoids admissions. So in terms of those 50 admissions we have seen in the last 5 years, only one of those was in the last 3 years. So we have managed to, by working proactively into that community, as Anne was saying at the beginning, we want to really learn from that model. And that's what we're trying to sort of say as we have this opportunity now. In terms of, are there people waiting to get into beds? Yes, there are times when people have to, we're trying to move things around as fast as we can to get people into the beds when they need them because of that unpredictable pattern of when people turn up. Do we have overall the right capacity? Yes, we do. We are able to accommodate everybody who needs to come into a bed. They come in just from one day to the next. Whether we get that, it can be difficult to get that just right. Was that the case back in 2019? Yes, it was the same case then. But what we've been able to do by putting some of the resources that have been moved around is that you can work more proactively in the community, give them less restrictive care, and it results in lower lengths of stay, which means you don't need as many beds overall. The point that you make around the MCAS, I don't recognise anyone staying on a recliner bed for 2 weeks. But I'd be happily case drawn to my attention because that's not as an instant framework. The total, the average length of stay is less than a day within that unit, and we aim towards trying to keep it well below that. The vast majority of people move through that unit, so that where we have difficulty is actually people from outside of London who occasionally have to come in there, and we have difficulties repatriating them into their own home systems. And that's not right, and we should be able to try and move them on quicker, but that's something we are trying to take up with those other counties and areas of the UK. But Anne, if you want to add anything.
No, I can just pick up on that, because actually we spent some time at Chelwest Henley last week, and we saw their transport budget, and so we know where people are going, and some of them are just coming backwards and forwards. So, I really question some of the data that's being given out.
I would just come in about Chelsea and Westminster. we actually see very few CNWL patients come into Chelsea and Westminster. It's mainly Mary's. What we do see is a lot of people from out of area, so particularly from South West London and St George's. So we've seen really long waits at South West London and St George's. In fact, we have, and I don't like naming other trusts, but I will, as you brought it up, we've had to bring some of those patients because of the very long waits into our own beds. I mean, I often do many of the calls at a weekend, and you know, I don't want to see people who even are out of area waiting hours in A&E, and we often bring some of those people into our mental health crisis assessment centre as well, because you know, a patient is a patient, and so I just want to add that context. Yes, a lot of people long waits at Chelsea and Westminster are patients that are not known to CNWL. That doesn't mean we don't have a duty to support and think around how we do that. And in fact, we are having a meeting with the COO from South West London and St George's shortly, just to talk about their pathway, because obviously that puts pressure on the whole system.
Can I just add something to what Councillor Addenbrooke said? The tower is going to be coming down, and I think you should really consider what additional support is going to be made available, because actually it terrifies me to think the mental health impact that it's going to have on our neighbours, and whatever's been seen before in terms of the impact that it's had on the community, I think it's going to pale potentially in comparison to what we're going to see when it comes down.
And actually, just picking up on your point, a lot of people can't access the mental health model service that live in North Kensington. So, you know, that the demand is going to grow and grow over the next, you know.
And if they can access it in 6 sessions of CBT, which is what I was offered, 6 sessions of CBT, what's that going to do really?
Well, we're certainly very happy to take that away and talk to the ICP and also talk to yourself. So.
I was just going to say, I know there's 2 questions, Linda and Stuart.
It's okay.
Okay, we might have to keep them quite
Okay,
quick, guys, but I use on the other times.
I'll run to.
Right, Linda?
Right. I can't work out whether we're facing an increased demand or in fact that there is a reduced capacity to deal with the system. And I'm speaking from personal experience insofar as when people are being sectioned, there is a really quite a substantial delay. And it's traumatic because normally the police are involved. They're trying to find a location for the individual. And on some occasions you talked about reducing the trauma. But if the police are trying to find a place of safety, and when you find that we're actually, on one occasion they actually considered Milton Keynes, you actually think, do we have enough capacity in the system? So we've had COVID, we've got a number of other different things, cost of living and everything else, which has introduced additional layers of stress. So you have acute stress, you have general stress, and then I'm just wondering whether that you have capacity within your system to be able to deal with the multiplicity of layers, because we're living with it on a day-to-day experience of actually having to deal with it as counsellors when they come and talk to us, because they're not getting the service that they require. GPs cannot handle the level of mental health problems that they're receiving. They're not getting, trying to access the single point of access is an absolute nightmare. We have people like people in North Kensington that are going to be facing trauma, but there are other places which are facing different problems. So the other problem that you have when you emphasise keeping people for a short period of time is, are you actually discharging people prematurely? And therefore, going forward, is there the framework of support available when they return to the community? Because I can assure you, and I'm sure there are officers in this room who repeatedly get emails from me saying, you're discharging people too early.
Without a discharge plan.
And now they're discharged back. Why, for example, discharge somebody at 5:30 on a Friday afternoon from St Charles and leave them to the community to deal with them. It is not appropriate mental health support. And this is either saying you don't care about the person, you haven't put the structures in place, you don't have the support in the community, you definitely don't have the relevant support in your supported specialist units, and you definitely don't have it when you return them to the community. And I think that Ms Flashery will support how many emails she gets from me from the people you have returned to the community.
And I think the problem here is that so many people live on their own. They don't have family members or friends to support them.
Yeah, but why return people on a Friday afternoon or bank holiday weekend, 5:30? By quarter to 6, the dealers were there. By 6 o'clock, the police were there. This was not appropriate, returning people to their community. That is not support in the community.
Just before you reply, Stuart, do you want to ask a question?
Don't worry, given the time, I'll
Sure.
I'm slightly tied to that.
Yeah.
In that we've sort of moved on from this report in a way. For a layperson sitting, I get this casework as well. What is the position? Can we get some really? Is Councillor Attenborough right? No reason to question. Are you right? What's the situation in the here and now? This paper is about the future. Fantastic. What's the position in the here and now? Because as somebody sitting in the middle here, I'm hearing all sorts of conflicting comments, and I'm not saying anybody's not right or wrong, but not now because we haven't got time. But can we have a proper, definitive answer to these issues as they're popping up?
Well, can I make one request?
Yes.
That the Gordon's been closed for quite some time now, so presumably there is some unspent money. I know you've invested some in the community, but perhaps that money could be invested in opening some beds, not all beds, but some beds. I know you're doing some work creating a community hub. You could have a community hub downstairs and you could have some beds upstairs.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I wonder if it's okay as well to just say that the system is overwhelmed and that you are massively overstretched. That is the reality, and I think it should be okay to say that.
There's a great need for
Because
mental
that's
health
the
support.
experience of a lot of people in the community. It's our experience, and it feels like there's like this huge elephant in the room, which is that we're not properly resourced, and no one wants to just.
I would fully come back to you and say mental health across the UK is not fully properly resourced.
Absolutely. This isn't unique to us.
In terms of the limited public power that we always have, wherever the level is set, there's only one way you can spend it, so you have to end up making decisions about that. If you looked at where CNWL was 3 years ago, we were the second highest in the country in terms of beds per head of population. So we were spending a lot of our public pounds on restricted inpatient interventions. I think that there is an opportunity for us to reappraise at this point is where does that bar get set? That's what the consultation is meant to be about. As Councillor Attenborough puts forward, maybe that's not the entire enclosure of the Gordon, maybe that's a small number of beds at the Gordon. That's going to be as one of the options within the consultation, as I want to say to other options as well.
But hold on, actually, getting the 50 beds back should be an option as well.
Getting the 50 beds back as well would also be an option on that consultation. But as we were saying before in our answer, you wouldn't have your step-down beds, you wouldn't have your crisis house, and you wouldn't have the MCAFs either. We can only spend those pounds once. The system we were running in 2019 was overwhelmed and not able to meet the demand for beds. Because we weren't able to do proactive work into the community and find alternatives to step people down quickly and avoid admissions. We've shifted to a system where we can do less restrictive intervention now. Are there times when the demand outstrips on a particular day? Yes, there sometimes is, and it can be a very tight situation, try and move things around fast enough to get people into the beds where they're needed. But as we can say, for the last 4 months, we've not had to place anyone out of area. We've managed to absorb that within our system that we have.
And we've been able to do that work in the community, which I think is really important. It's about, we talked about prevention earlier on.
Yeah.
I think that is really, really key. We can continue with the traditional model of mental health, which is mainly a very bed-based model with very limited community, and of course community input, and that's the decision that we collectively will need to make.
If I could just, sorry, if I just may say one thing. I guess the disconnect is what we're hearing in the community isn't matching with the data. And it's not really adding up from what I'm hearing from the people accessing services. So I guess it's about being a bit more in terms of what's available now and how do we get the Gordon up? Because if I go back and I say, well, I've went to the committee and there's no kind of time of when these beds are back in, it's not going to be received very well in terms of community relationships with the CMHT, community mental health services.
I do think that disconnect between the data and narrative is interesting, and I do think we do need to do more to understand that and work really closely in collaboration with everyone. I do wonder whether the Gordon temporary closure of beds is acted like a bit of a lightning rod of an issue for everyone to say, actually, that looks like, I was struggling to get access to a bed, well, you close some beds over there, obviously that's the cause. Whereas if we go back to 2019, you would have still find those anecdotes coming forward of people saying we were struggling to get access to beds, and you would speak to your amps, they were similarly having problems back then as well. And
I mean, what I've seen has changed, and I spend a lot of time sort of, as does Gareth, but certainly spent quite a lot of time in the MCAS talking to patients. I think the support around people has changed. So a lot of the people I see have very little in their lives. They often have no employment, they have very temporary housing or no housing, they have issues with their neighbours. The fabric of society seems to have changed for many people that I now see, which was very different when I worked as a frontline social worker or when I worked as a nurse, where things seemed different and there was more support around that sort of, there was more sort of social aspects of support, which does feel a lot less now. So one day I was in the MCAS and all the 6 patients that were in there basically were homeless, they had real issues around family, they had no money. And my heart was breaking. I was thinking, what are we going to do? Because we can lock these people away forever, but there's so many more people you can lock away, and surely that's not the right thing to do.
We're not suggesting
No,
for an
I know you're
instant
not.
that we inappropriate
No, absolutely not.
people.
But that was real. That's been a real change for me that I've seen. That there's people have a lot less in their lives.
Can I just make my requests again? That you look at using some of the money we've not spent while the Gordon's been closed, at opening up some beds as soon as possible. Not part of consultation, we need beds now. And I think there's some issues around the data, and perhaps we need to send you some questions about data so we can get clarity on that. Maybe some clarity on the funding that you've received from central government, the money that you've saved with the Gordon being closed. But the request is get some beds open now, while you consult, because there is a need now. That's what we hear. That's what we're seeing from our residents, and we can only see that demand growing. Thank you. Sorry, Chair.
I'm sorry for everyone that it's been a long one, but I think that was very important for us to discuss that. And I think the time only shows that we all feel really strongly enough that there is a real need to keep these beds open. And you've heard Sarah's thoughts on this, but I think she makes a really good recommendation, and I also welcome the fact that you're going to be supplying your refurbishment plan within your consultation, because I just think if that's not part of it, then also just have a scope of how long it's going to take, because we need to understand if you are going to reopen all the beds, hopefully, how long this is actually going to take. And I think, if we come back to you with some questions on data, that would be good, just so we can understand what is going on in terms of what we're hearing in the community and the data you're seeing as to what we think is going on. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we are moving on to item on the agenda bar item health and wellbeing strategy. The draft health and wellbeing strategy 2023 to 2033 sets out an ambition for health and wellbeing for the residents in Kensington, Chelsea and Westminster that it seeks the committee's endorsement of the draft strategy. Key members of the Health Superintendent and Public Health include Chair of Health and Wellbeing Board, Sarah.
I don't know who was.
Okay.
I'm here if you need.
Oh, Rachel, you can introduce it.
Sorry,
Rachel's done a huge amount of work on this.
sorry.
Shall I?
Yeah, go on.
So you've got the report hopefully, which just gives you a brief overview. We're really pleased to present the draft version of our 10-year health and wellbeing strategy for Kensington, Chelsea and Westminster. We are live today for the consultation version, and that will run until the 19th of June. So you have the consultation version, it is draft, so we welcome comments from the committee. You have until the 19th of June. We have a whole range of methods. There is a consultation plan alongside the strategy, which sets out the audiences in which we wish to engage, and a lot of feedback that we've had over the work we've done over the last 6 to 12 months, in particular, is about how we reach residents who will benefit the most from having targeted effort. We have a lot of it, we have a lot of inequality. The strategy is very ambitious about reducing inequality in our boroughs. And so that's what we aim to do with the consultation, is make sure that our reach, and we've had really excellent input on how we can do that. We've got a range of workshops, online surveys, reaching out through existing groups, community groups, our voluntary sector, our resident groups, etc., to gain feedback and input into the strategy. It is a vision, so it is 10-year ambition, and additional strategies and plans will flow from this overarching health and wellbeing strategy. And then, of course, every year or 2 years we'll have action plans that flow from that, and we do ask what actions in particular would people like us to focus on first, etc. So yeah, we welcome your input to the strategy over the next few weeks.
No, I just think, if you know of any groups that you think we should be in contact with, please let us know. And we have been holding the meetings out in the community, it's not sitting in the town hall. So hopefully meet people at the town.
We've taken it to our Health and Wellbeing Board that Sarah co-chairs, and that was agreed to move forward with consultation, subject to scrutiny, etc., and receiving further comment. Thank you.
Two questions on committee. Does anyone want to start?
Right, start. Thank you for coming and presenting this. On page 18, you say about how, and I think this is reinforced by the discussion we just had, the discussion over mental health, about accountability, which I think is really important. How specifically you say about how the board changing how it works to be more open to communities it serves. How can you give a sort of specific instance of how you see the community holding the board to account for successes and failures? Because I think that's really important.
Yeah. Councillor Abbott might want to add, but we have spent some time looking at the function of the Health and Wellbeing Board and made the space in the board to have more time, more reflection time. We also look at the wider determinants of health each time, so that people can have focus sessions and we have stalls. A lot of what we hear is we don't know how to access, or we don't know what's there, or the links between partners and different organisations and residents. And we really try and encourage, and it's full, the room's much fuller, I would say. So we've got a lot more people coming and hearing and making connection at the meeting, and the planning of the meeting. So it's not just about a 2-hour meeting every 2 months. The planning of the meeting and the connections that are made, I would say, is also a benefit. And the Health and Wellbeing Board has the accountability for delivering the strategy, and then any plan that comes under the board to deliver, which is obviously the key. It's the action that flows from the ambition
that is the most important thing. And again, it's involving co-producing with a place-based partnership as well as the other accountable. We're all part of that, each of the member organisations, local authority, the NHS, the regulatory sector. We have a governance structure and a programme structure to actually deliver the things, and ideally they are, or as many as possible, are co-produced, and they have lots of resident engagement and much more accountability built into them. And people that have been here longer than me can say whether or not they see that trajectory of improvement, of it being more accountable and more involved. I believe it is. I think there's still always more to do. And you know, we're listening to that and hoping to improve that as we go on.
I think there's been a big change actually going to Byborough as well, because we then get more people coming. We've been at, I don't think we've had a meeting in the town hall for years. And that's made a big difference about who gets involved, who attends, who gets involved, and feedback again. So it's completely changed from what it was. We used to sit in committee room 3, huddled up, just a few of us. Now it's changed completely. So you're more than welcome to come anytime, Portia.
I would love to join the board, you see, because if we're going to, you know, deal with inequality, I think there should be someone on the board itself that experiences inequality. In order for us to make wise decisions, we can have as many workshops as we want to, but if there has to be someone in the midst who has suffered from inequality in society.
But the board doesn't meet privately. It is a public meeting every time. So there are specific people on the board, and then there is anybody else can come. They can ask questions. They can get involved. It's not. I don't think we've ever had a vote yet.
Not in my.
But you know, it's a very open meeting. It's not just us sitting there making a decision. It's very much you can.
So who's
I'm part of the board. I should mention just for reference. And one of the best things that I've only been here, come on, I've not been here much either, but in terms of one of the other elements is we have people directly using services coming and telling their story. Yeah. So that's been really, from a Health Watch perspective, amazing. And we've been able to do that with our mental health and social care forums that we do within the advocacy projects. It's an opportunity for people to just tell them exactly what it's like, and that format's really successful, I think.
And that's a commitment the board have made for each board. We always have that. Yeah.
I think it's a wonderful strategy, but I also think that we need equality. Okay, if we're going to tackle inequality, I think we need to separate who gets commission from the council to sit on board. Health Watch does. So is our organisation. I think we need to have someone in the middle to talk and to represent our community the way it should. And I also would like to know who's going to scrutinise the board as well.
You'd like to know?
Who will scrutinise the Health and Wellbeing Board? So we'll liaise with external organisation. We'll work alongside, you know, the NHS and all these community organisations. But in reality, who's going to oversee this board?
Well, it has its place in overall governance, and you know, it is the accountable board. But we've always committed to bringing the items to both scrutiny committees, and you know, we've committed on doing some work on the forward planning, so what items are coming through, what decisions are being taken. We can certainly work on how we make that more open to scrutiny, how we do the forward planning of the agendas and decisions. That could work, yeah.
Because a lot of the papers do go to children, in the past have gone to children's if it's related to their scrutiny, or come to adults. You know, it just depends what's on the agenda.
I think it's very important to get representation from all parties on a board if we're going to challenge inequality in the health service.
Thank you.
Thanks. I mean, health inequalities definitely comes through as a priority in the document, which is great. But I guess the question is, you can argue that the job of addressing health inequalities is actually not just the job of health, you know. So things need to happen upstream.
It's everybody's business.
Yeah, exactly. It's health inequalities is actually that the health is, that's the final outcome. Things that, you know, need to be addressed upstream. So I was just wondering what
in reach or you know what work has been done by all the different departments within the council, given that actually health inequalities is housing or employment or housing and you know education and mental health and the rest of it. And I think the priority really is that this isn't just a job for people who are working under the umbrella of health, and I guess that's not, I didn't really see evidence of that in here if we really want to tackle inequalities in a serious way rather than just talk about it, which we do tend to do a lot, and yet we're still in this situation of, you know, immense, really quite staggering levels of inequality in this borough.
So in public health, because the DPH also sits on the board, we are, it's a whole council approach. So in fact, Anna's doing a lot of work with housing at the moment, because housing has come out as a really key priority for keeping the Grenfell legacy going. So I think there's a lot of work ongoing. I'm not ready to bring it to anything, it's a bit too early, but you know, we are looking at things across the council more through public health.
And I'll draw your attention to page 13, which is a fantastic illustration that we've worked with across all of the work, you know, all of the work that's gone into developing the strategy, reducing health inequalities involves everyone. It's kind of the key strap line in the illustration, and you're exactly right. And in the 10 ambitions, you know, I think the aim, you know, and also the 4 outcome areas, mental well-being, access to services, healthy and safe, good quality schools, housing and environment, and the social determinants being kind of the key features, that health is not determined by, it's determined by your environment in a large way. And hopefully the ambition, the 10 ambitions, it will, if we can hold each of our things that we do to reduce inequality, we can link those to those ambitions around housing, around environment, employment, etc., income, then we can aim to reduce inequality in the long term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels a lot like with the cost of living crisis and everything else that people are being put through at the moment, there's just far too much of an assault on these social determinants for any work to really be impactful. I know that's a really kind of hopeless way of looking at it, but it's more about just thinking just that the root causes, because it's about environment, but actually it's about socioeconomic status, isn't it, and lifting people out of poverty. That's how you address health inequalities, not by, you know, health interventions, actually. You can do like additional targeted work, and I guess it would be useful to know what that is, because, you know, things have gone very wrong before you get to the point where there is such levels of inequality in life expectancy, say. So it would just be good to know what targeted bits of work are being done for those people who are in those parts of the borough that are the most deprived, and, you know, you do need that extra support.
Absolutely, and hopefully some of the case studies that come through in the document show the flavour of that and what's intended to be built on, because it is about using the evidence base, using what we know about need, and looking at our populations and it's about equity rather than equality necessarily. So where people will need different things and more things because they have more need, that's where we need to make sure that each intervention that we plan and design, it takes that into account. And that's where we use the evidence base. So the action plans will need to have all of that in them, and that's our test in a way. That's the point of a strategy. It's not an action plan. It's a test, and it should be there. And each thing that we do should have that test, and the plan should flow from it.
Yeah, and also, sorry. I also think that there should be constant workshops in order for us to collect more data in order for us to make. Because if we use the same organisations on a regular basis, we won't hear different voices, and it's about capturing those quiet voices so that we'll be able to make an impact in those local residents' lives.
So if you've got any particular
Yes.
residence groups.
Gerald.
Just on the actual, I realise this is quite a high level strategic document and a lot will flow from it. But I'd like to see some what success, how do we know when this is successful? And I appreciate those measures made from it. But over our lifetime on the council, we've got numerous of the, not just in your area, but in every area. And it'd be useful to know when will this be successful and how we're going to measure that. And just something else I'd be interested in the page 14, where there are our borough, I'm getting to our borough, some benchmarking. I don't know whether those, okay, you could argue none of them are acceptable at all, but are they worse than other boroughs? Are they, and if they are worse, why are they worse? If they're just some benchmarking, I guess, would help put that page into context.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the aim is to have an already in development an outcomes framework. So what we need is for a 10-year strategy, long-term life expectancy, for example, you would expect to see over the long term the gap in life expectancy reducing. However, we'll need measures that measure towards that. Are we going in the right direction? So there are a whole range of outcome measures, and we can, it's difficult in a document like this to put lots of metrics in, but I can assure you that they do sit behind it, and if the committee would like to see some of that, then we can bring it up.
Yeah.
And benchmarking, thank you, I'll take that point away and see how we could reflect some of that.
Yeah, mine was kindly the board reached out to Healthwatch and the Advocacy Project about doing an easy read version of this, and this is something we're currently doing. Grant at the moment, doing a lot of work around that, and we will be doing it with perspective of using it with expert by experience. Does this work? Are you getting what the strategy is? And to send that through to the board when we finalise it. But hopefully with the consultation process, I've forgotten how long it is, but towards the end of that, we'll have that signed off as well. So that might bring it to life a little bit more.
It's open till the 19th of June, yeah.
Yeah, so just following on from that, is it possible just to get also that list of the targeted interventions for the additional kind of services that you'll be providing as part of this?
So it's not like we have this is flowing from the strategy, these are all the additional target interventions. This is the ambition that we set, and then as we develop the plans, so there'll be biannual plans, you can ask us to bring forward our programmes of work, etc. Then you could see that, but I don't think there's a ready-made, here's all the additional targeted interventions that we can provide.
Okay.
We've given a flavour of some of the really good work that is going on already, and there's more than that.
So this is, I mean, it's helpful as like a broad vision of what we'd want to see, isn't it?
And how to test to get our plans.
Yeah, it would just be good to have an idea, like a more focused idea of what the specific plans actually are, to try and meet this. Because I, with the exception of the case studies, it was really difficult to get a sense of what's actually being done or what's being planned, really.
And on that one, just in comparison to what is being done in plans, in comparison to what is already being done, would be interesting to see what's new and what sort of.
And then linking it to Gerald's question about the outcome measures as to, based on those two things, maybe, because I think there are some things that might be, great ambitions, but are they valid measures? Like reducing life expectancy, that might not be a reasonable goal to check whether this is actually effective or not. It's quite ambitious, that one.
Yeah, understood, yeah. We'll need some metrics in between.
Any other questions? I think I'm just going to sort of summarise, and if you could send the data that Gerard just referenced and what we just spoke about.
Which may come later.
Which may come later, exactly.
Actually, a good one is the suicide prevention plan. Yeah. Because that was something that's come.
And then just generally, for your help to recommend any groups that might be useful.
That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
No, just 1 second. Are we able to facilitate workshop sessions, and how often can we do this?
Yes,
As a
so what-
community?
We have developed a consultation pack, so it's kind of ready to go, as it were. So you know, an organisation can take it on and then facilitate and run a workshop with that pack is the aim. Plus, we might be able to support. We've got room bookings people can use. So if you've got those ideas, please do contact me, Rachel Sony. And we can help facilitate that. Would be very helpful.
Move on to agenda agenda number 6, suicide prevention strategy update. This report provides the Adult Social Care and Select Committee with an update on the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea suicide prevention strategy 2022-2025. Lead member of Adult Social Care and Health is to present alongside Run and Direct Health.
I'm also joined by my colleague, Safia Kupal, who is the lead public health officer for the suicide prevention strategy. So very briefly, I'll take the papers read, and I'm very conscious of the time this evening as well. It's really good that we've seen the health and wellbeing strategy first, because that sort of sets out the context for our ambitions around mental and emotional wellbeing, particularly the third priority, but you can see how mental health runs through all the priorities within the health and wellbeing board strategy. Suicide, our rate of suicide in the borough, as you know, is similar to the national average. It's a little above the London average. And generally we see, sadly, 14 residents who take their life each year. This report provides an update on the Council's suicide prevention strategy, which was launched last year. The paper sets out the actions under the 5 aims and also goes into some of our future plans for this financial year. And we're taking it to you now to ask if you agree with the actions that we've put forward. Are there any other actions we should be focusing on? And how best can we secure member support to this important agenda?
Thank you very much, and thank you for presenting this. Strategy update and further strategy attached. I just want to start by talking about men, which is a huge reference. As one of the most vulnerable groups, and 3 in 4 suicides in the UK are men. And a statistic that I find really alarming is 3 out of 4 people who take their own life have had no previous contact with mental health or psychological support services. And I just want to talk a little bit more about the current services and initiatives you have in place, or planning to put in place, in order to support men who are suffering from bad mental health and suicidal thoughts. As in Appendix A, you state that you are going to establish safe sources of information for men to access. And I just want to push you on this, as if men are notoriously very bad at talking or seeking help when they need it, and they commonly don't, which is part of the problem, then how is this going to make a huge difference when they're probably not going to go seeking these resources? It's great that they're there, but I think in terms of actually making a difference and getting men to talk and to break a lot of the stigma there, I think it's about creating familiar and non-intimidating settings in order to help them attempt to break those barriers down. I know you've been working with the Men's Strength Initiative, but is there anything more that we can be doing to running other initiatives like this across the borough, or partnering with organisations who are already running lots of these projects across the country? Because I think it just feels, for this vulnerable group, it feels incredibly slim I mean, I know you're going to run campaigns and that's great, but I don't think just having resources is enough. And I think we should be thinking outside of the box and thinking creatively about groups that we can set up and partnering with other organisations to just do something different, because we're not going to break the stigma by putting some documents on our website.
One of the other services is Minds FC, which is the football team in North Kensington, who are very successful, and they now have a ladies team, which I know doesn't address your, but I think Men's Shed is a really good example.
Yeah.
Minds FC is another example, and I think, it's what else can we be doing? That's what we need to do.
Yeah. I just it couldn't be more important, and that felt really slim as considering 3 out of 4 suicides are men, and that's the answer in terms of this borough. I just think we can be doing so much more.
So I think that's very much noted, and in many ways it's taken the 5 components of the strategy together and how they interplay across each other. So staff will probably want to mention a little bit about how some of the work to reduce stigma does include in-depth conversations with communities to understand what some of the challenges are in terms of speaking about suicide, speaking about mental health, identifying mental health issues and concerns, and supporting people. And that includes work with our faith communities as well, in terms of us reaching some of the seldom heard voices and hard to reach groups within our community. But it is how we work across 5 strategies to ensure that men's needs are integrated into that. So I know Safi would want to say a little bit more about the work she's been doing.
Currently I'm working with CNWL and with Community Living Well. Now they've brought a group together across all 8 boroughs in North West London to have that discussion around what provisions are there across the 8 boroughs to be able to support men's mental health and if anyone has suicidal ideation. And it has been identified, it is very small. However, this is an opportunity for us to have these conversations, identify where the gaps are, but also open up those conversations on how we can do better in terms of engaging with men. So we currently have had a handful of, only 2 meetings, but within those meetings we've been able to sort of map what services we are. You have mentioned 2, and the third one that we do have working in the borough is Future Men, which focuses around young men and single fathers, being able to have those conversations around mental well-being, mental health, and be able to provide those open conversations. So what we anticipate is to be able to identify where those gaps are, and then be able to speak with our commissioning teams to establish how can we ensure that we've engaged with our communities to be able to get the services that meet their needs, but able to open up conversations and make it a non-clinical setting. So that's something that they've identified, is that people want to come out of those clinical settings and into a more open environment. But we also identify in itself that we need to make sure that these services are open to everyone. And as Anna's highlighted, we have engaged with our self-help groups and ensure that we've had representation and we've listened to what they've said. And one of the things that have been highlighted is around our faith networks and how we can bring them into the fold and have these open conversations, but also take away the stigma that's attached to it, but also ensure that everyone understands what are the myths and how do we sort of take those misconceptions and sort of use that as an opportunity to open up conversations and also cross space. You never know who will walk in through those doors.
I was just going to say thank you, and that's really helpful. But yeah, I just urge you, there's some incredible foundations out there that are running. I mean, Movember Foundation has about 20 different projects or something, which are very different. And the thing is, if you're going to capture them, they've all got different interests, and they're not going to fall into one bracket. So it's about thinking outside of the box of how you can get lots of different, not types of them, but whatever they're interested in, sort of like-minded people where they feel like they can break down those barriers and have those conversations. And just before talking to anyone else, one area I feel like isn't mentioned in the strategy is, to me, is the workplace and employees. So we're talking about training schools and training lots of our local organisations of how to deal with mental health, but actually, I mean, we spend most of our days at work surrounded by the same people every day. If someone's living alone or if someone doesn't have a family who they can rely on, they're constant quite often, apart from their friends, but not everyone has lots of friends who will be checking on them the whole time, is your workplace and your employees, and actually educating employees and businesses across this borough to understand what they should be looking out for, to understand basically what to do in situations where they might be worried about someone within the company. And I just think that's should be part of this, because, and I might be wrong if I've missed something within that is talking about it, but to me that's constant in all our lives. And if you're sitting next to someone at work or you speak to someone at work and they can notice that something's going wrong, it can be flagged, and that's an area where I feel like we should be covering up as many of these gaps where people could be falling through the net.
So,
is that Jared?
So within the strategy, we have a first priority that talks about the Suicide Safer Communities project. And what we are looking to do is to develop a training offer, which is literally for all of our communities and the different settings, and that does include businesses. Now, with that, what we hope to do is to commission that training offer to our local communities, and also within that is to have that trainer offer as well within there. So when we are training up employers, then what we will do is embed that trainer offer within there, so that can continue on and cascade down within that company and within those organisations itself. So hopefully in autumn that will go live with a campaign, and we hope to have a digital platform in place to sort of bring together all the information, all the resources, so everyone has that one place to go to be able to support them through that training and through that delivery of information within those sort of settings, those communities.
Thank you for this the strategy report, which is, I think, is excellent. And I think what we're just talking about now underpins your seven pillars, if you like. Because part of what we're talking about now is the number 6 about media and how the media portrays suicide and how we need to work with the media to portray it differently. For example, for years there's been a campaign about trying to stop people talking about committing suicide. It actually goes back to when suicide was illegal and you were committing a crime. So there's lots of things that we can work on, have been working on. I think also what is great in here is the work through community organisations and volunteer bodies. So for example, I know Samaritans are in central London now got working with about 10 or 15 companies across central London in doing education programmes about suicide. So this stuff is happening, and maybe you're saying it's about bringing it together. Just one very practical thing where we're talking about hotels. We need to be into hotels. Traditionally, a place where people have gone to be quiet on their own, sort of solace, and hotels should be helping to promote emergency support lines. They are reluctant because they would argue they're places of happiness, not places of sadness. But actually, we know that a lot of people go to hotels to kill themselves.
I would like to say something. I'm very curious. I'd like to know if you've got a comms team and how effective it is into getting the message out. Because often I hear a lot of residents, they don't know who to go to talk to. I mean, although you only find those who have already been in services, like mental health service, they'll have that sort of link. If they don't have any form of connection, how do they get that the service that is required of them? That's number one. And what strategies have you put in place for the viral suicidal prevention strategy for women of 45 to 55 years old? Because it seems that's the highest rate. That's the age you have the highest rate in suicidality cases.
So if I pick up on that kind of first sort of part of the query, So we obviously work with our media team within the council, so the corporate media resource that we have in the council. But part of what we've described in the paper is the commissioning of a campaign that is an effective way of reaching communities, the seldom heard voices and the high risk groups, and particularly that high risk group of males, and particularly young males aged 20 to 40 who are within our group. So that work we're hoping is going to help reach the parts of the community that we haven't been so effective in reaching before. And particularly the work with our faith communities is incredibly important. And this shift towards a safer communities approach to suicide, where we're having conversations with communities about what local needs are, what local challenges are, and what it is we can work with communities to put in place to address it. And that was very much a recommendation from the Living Appleby report to shift towards that safer communities approach. So engage and involve communities in conversations around suicide prevention, and indeed wider mental and emotional well-being and support for that. I think it can be very challenging for people to access the resources and those traditional methods of having them up on our websites and expecting people to go to our websites. We know that reaches a very small part of the population. So the intention is this work, this safer communities approach, will help reach those grassroots community organisations, help train people up within the communities, and roll out those messages to more of a snowballing approach than we've used to date.
I think that's a good strategy. I also think that social prescribing is very important. It's very effective. I've been looking at this other community model, and they're very effective. I mean, because they've got all those resources in one hub. If someone feels frustrated, they'll easily find a solution to their problem instead of going. Football can cure the problem in terms of letting off endorphins and all that, but when they go on, they will have problems, and not having that sort of social net to support them. I think people can do get frustrated, so I think having all the resources under one roof, that would be able to, and also to have someone to guide them along the way, to carry them, or a caseworker, or a social worker, it depends if there is mental health services, or they haven't engaged in the past. There's supposed to be somewhere, someone to just go and say, look, I'm not feeling that, how can I get that sort of support? And then, not getting neglected, but they're carried along the way. But it's to just give them that platform.
Yeah, so again, it's just a question about targeting the interventions and how that's happening, because it is men, but it's very socially deprived men. You know, you're 10 times more likely to die by suicide if you're from one of the more deprived parts of the borough than an affluent part. And I'm just thinking about, in the context of the cost of living crisis, which already is causing a lot of stress for people, just what work is being done around financial hardship services, and employment and housing. And also, one of the groups that I guess isn't very fashionable to think about, or doesn't elicit as much empathy, is men who are perhaps antisocial, substance misusers, and actually they're probably among the highest risk of suicide. And what's being done for them, and I know that's a really difficult group to access. And then just finally about what do you know of the groups who have been difficult to access, what their demographics are and how they're being accessed.
So I'll touch a little bit first on the sort of substance misuse linked sort of with antisocial behaviour. So one of the step forwards this year has been the development of combating drugs partnerships, and there have also been funding streams which have come from the combating drugs partnership. the purpose of these partnerships is very much to pull together the gaps between, say, a health and wellbeing board, a community safety partnership, a sort of serious youth violence partnership, and look at how those sort of plans are better coordinated and better dreamed up to support people. We do know that having people in treatment is protective against antisocial behaviour and crime. So very much the thrust of the current strategy is joining up that pathway between the criminal justice system and treatments, and making sure that when somebody goes into prison, there's some join up around that. When somebody perhaps comes out of the service, there is a seamless join up sort of back into services, because often that's been quite a successful period of treatment while people are sort of in prison or as part of that wider criminal justice system. So that's very much a focus of the work we're doing through the Combating Drugs Partnership, and really important work that I think we'll be developing going into the next few years. In terms of financial hardship, employment and housing, as Councillor Attenborough mentioned, we've very much got a whole council approach to public health. So one of the things we do within the public health team is work with all the directorates across the council to establish shared priorities, and then to develop joint working plans and joint investment plans for areas that we think are going to have the most impact and get joint outcomes. So they include aspects like the cost of living work within the council and supporting that through public health investment, and also through making sure that they're knitted into the wider public health services. And alongside that, same for employment and housing services, which again, as you know, is very much around that wider determinants of health. As you said, shifting things more upstream to ensure that we're preventing problems before people are hitting those services.
So are you able to give any examples of what that additional investment has been like? Like what additional measures have been invested in? Would say housing, community.
Yes, so basically there are a number of projects, the details of which I don't have on the tip of my tongue at the moment, but what I can do is provide a background report scrutiny, sort of outlining the details of some of those projects. For example, there are specific projects that we're looking at the moment with housing teams, and some of those projects are around identifying people within the housing system who need support, and how housing officers are trained to identify people and to link people back into services. So I can give you more detail about those projects. Some of it links up also with aspects like hoarding, which we know is a specific issue and a challenge, and again how we link those services up. So I can provide more detail in a written paper to the committee on those interventions.
Sorry.
Please can you come work with us, because we've got huge findings on this particular area, especially I was going with what I previously said about the online perspective, which I know from history, previous work, not this one, but that seems to be really lacking, that kind of community engagement online in terms of projects. Not everyone wants to pick up the phone anymore. We're looking at a completely different kind of rewrite of culture. People that are going to Google, they're going to Google late at night, what's available, you know, really amping that up, and we're doing huge amounts of work on that at the moment in Health Watch. So please just come along and, yeah, we'll share our findings. Yes, please, yeah, that'd be great.
Just to pick up again on that group of not known to services, a particular group that I've been interested in, because often they're not known to services because they don't want to be known to services because of their whole stigma around mental health and suicide. So again, what I like about this is working through community organisations that aren't seen as the authority, which I think are important, and also picking up their different methods. Samaritans, when they introduced email, it took them into a whole new community that would never think about picking up the phone and speaking. And when they introduced texting, it took them into a whole another different community. And not only a different community, but a different group of desperate need. So again, the variety of support that we give is also helps to get into communities that we might not have got into before.
And if I could, actually, Safi's done a huge amount of work on this, because this actually came out of the community resilience group that was set up at the beginning of COVID, and became a sub-work stream in the Mission of Health and Wellbeing, which had a lot of it had Michael Ash and Angela Spence. So it had a lot of the community network in at the beginning, and I think that's why it's been so helpful. So thank you for all the work you've done.
Can I just quickly add about the sheds, the men, what's it called again?
Men's sheds.
Men's sheds, yeah. Initiatives like that are extremely powerful because, again, thinking about the most at-risk people, it's these elderly men who are very socially isolated, and actually getting them linked up has gone a huge way in getting them supported. I unfortunately had somebody decline when I referred them to the home treatment team because they didn't accept people who were just suicidal. This was an elderly man with a hoarding, which is why I remembered it, and he benefits hugely from the men's shed. So any other additional kind of groups like that can be developed to diminish social isolation is.
I was also just going to say on that note, which I was going to say to the committee, but whether it be interesting to do a working group on initiatives like that we could look at or work with other charities and speak to them about what are the types of pop-ups or projects we could be rolling out across the borough that are based on that model. There are so many different types to be used as examples of things that we could do to add to what you guys are doing.
Thank you, Chair. I also think that it's very important to actually let our residents understand how to manage their emotions and to understand the process of their thought. I think that it should be a course taught in maybe Kingsley College. Something that runs over a duration of time to attract those who are feeling low and isolated. I think we should use all the resources that we can put out.
And much of this as well, it starts in schools. So, we visited a school recently who had this wonderful approach around colours, and the children used colours to describe their moods. And so initiatives like that that really help and support children and young people to identify and sort of manage emotions, and how we instill and build resilience at an early age so it benefits people throughout their life course. It's quite an important part of the fundamental strategy.
And in addition to what Anna has said, is that we are working with CNWL and the 8 local authorities around safety planning. And what the reason why we're working across boroughs is that we are looking for a universal approach of safety planning and take away the clinical aspect so anyone can do it. So in the event that someone is in crisis, they're able to have a conversation without am I qualified, should I be doing this? But through the training that we hope to provide in autumn, that template will be part of the training. So as we deliver this training into different settings, we'll have that universal approach with safety planning. And it'd be such an aspiration to have within schools. At the beginning of the year, they go through an appropriate safety plan. So in the event that they are getting a bit anxious during school, they've got something to refer to and speak to the trusted adult rather than go to the point when they're in a crisis and worried.
And also, barbers and salons and stuff. Because I think that's the kind of,
And also, it's about actually understanding their thought process and to know what triggers what sort of behaviour or thinking patterns so that they will be able to actually, find ways of working around that to make it a positive outcome.
Barbers don't work for everybody.
you're going to get your feet done.
Festivals are another good place.
Yeah,
to
festivals are really good.
Festivals.
We don't have many festivals.
That's common practice.
Any further questions? If not, otherwise that one's going to get very hungry. Thank you so much. It's such an important event, and you guys have taken it. If you could send that background information on the projects to the committee, that would be great. Now we move on to Agenda 7, Select Committee Work Programme Update. This report is an update on the work programme and scrutiny activities, setting out the reports received in social media and responses to requests for information. Anyone have any contributions for the work? James, do you have any comments?
I'd only add, Chair, I noted what you said about suicide prevention and your discussion about working groups, so maybe that's something you could take forward in the new municipal year.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it would be a really good idea.
And just say as well, Chair, in reference to other discussions tonight as well, the committee does have a recommendation making power as well, recommendation making competency. So perhaps after you've received the notes of tonight's meeting, if you feel there's areas you want to make recommendations about the other reports, by all means come back to us and we can facilitate that.
That concludes this meeting. Thank you everyone for your time.